If someone had asked me a few years ago whether I believed a friend could quietly destroy another person's life, I would have laughed. I always believed that betrayal came from obvious enemies, not from the people who celebrated your birthdays, helped you unpack moving boxes, and remembered your favorite coffee order. I believed that genuine friendship existed because I had experienced it before. Or at least, I thought I had. Looking back now, I realize that some people never break your trust all at once. They do it slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you wake up surrounded by consequences that don't make any sense. That is exactly what happened to me. Everything started when I moved to a new city. Leaving my hometown wasn't easy, but I felt like I needed a fresh start. I had accepted a position at a marketing company that offered better opportunities than I had ever imagined. It wasn't my dream job, but it felt like the first real step toward the future I wanted. The city was beautiful. The streets were always full of people. Coffee shops were busy from morning until evening. Parks were filled with families, runners, and people walking their dogs. Every weekend there seemed to be another festival or outdoor market. From the outside, it looked like the perfect place to build a new life. The only problem was that I knew absolutely no one. The first few weeks were lonely. I went to work, came back to my apartment, made dinner for one, watched television for a while, and went to sleep. Every morning I promised myself I would meet new people soon, but after long workdays, I usually felt too exhausted to go anywhere. The loneliness wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was eating dinner without anyone asking how my day had been. It was exploring new places alone. T was scrolling through old photos from home and wondering if I had made the right decision. At work, everyone seemed polite enough, but most of my coworkers already had their own groups of friends. They had worked together for years. They shared inside jokes I didn't understand and stories that had started long before I arrived. I tried to fit in without forcing anything. Then I met Emily. She worked in another department, but our offices were on the same floor. The first time we talked was completely by accident. I dropped an entire stack of folders while trying to carry too many things at once. Papers scattered across the hallway before I could stop them. Before I even bent down, another pair of hands started helping me. Emily smiled as if helping strangers was something she did every day. She seemed relaxed, confident, and incredibly easy to talk to. That 5-minute conversation somehow turned into lunch together later that afternoon. She asked thoughtful questions without making me feel uncomfortable. She wanted to know where I had lived before, what had brought me to the city, and whether I was enjoying my new job. For the first time since moving, I felt like someone genuinely wanted to get to know me. Over the following weeks, we kept running into each other. Sometimes she invited me for coffee before work. Sometimes we ate lunch together. Occasionally we stayed after work and walked through a nearby park before heading home. Little by little, my new city stopped feeling unfamiliar. Emily introduced me to places I probably never would have found on my own. A quiet bookstore hidden between two larger buildings, a bakery that made the best cinnamon rolls I had ever tasted, a peaceful botanical garden where we spent entire Saturday afternoons walking through colorful flowers and shaded paths. She seemed to know everyone. Baristas greeted her by name. People smiled when they saw her. Even coworkers from different departments seemed happy whenever she walked into a room. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Making friends as an adult isn't always easy. Some people spend years searching for someone they truly connect with. I had found that person within a month, or so I believed. The more time we spent together, the more comfortable I became. I started telling her stories about my childhood. I talked about my parents. I admitted that moving had been much harder emotionally than I expected. I even shared some of my biggest insecurities. Sometimes I worried I wasn't experienced enough for my new job. Sometimes I felt like everyone around me was smarter than I was. Emily always seemed to know exactly what to say. She encouraged me whenever I doubted myself. She reminded me that everyone struggles in the beginning. She told me I deserved every opportunity I had earned. Those conversations made me trust her even more. Several months passed. Life slowly became exactly what I had hoped for when I accepted the job offer. I had work that challenged me, I had favorite places around the city. Most importantly, I had someone I considered my closest friend. People at work even joked that Emily and I were impossible to separate. We laughed about it every time. One Friday evening, Emily invited me to a small gathering with several of her friends. I was nervous because I didn't know anyone, but she insisted I would fit in perfectly. The evening went surprisingly well. Everyone seemed welcoming. We played board games, ordered pizza, and talked for hours. When I returned home that night, I felt happier than I had in months. For the first time since moving away from home, I truly felt like I belonged somewhere. Looking back now, I often think about that evening, not because anything bad happened, because it was the moment I completely lowered my guard. After that night, I stopped questioning anything. If Emily suggested introducing me to someone, I trusted her. If she gave me advice, I followed it. If she wanted to know something about my personal life, I answered honestly. She became the first person I called whenever something exciting happened. When I received praise from my manager after completing an important project, Emily celebrated with me. When I felt overwhelmed by deadlines, she listened patiently. When I was considering applying for a promotion, she encouraged me to believe in myself. Everything seemed normal, perfect, even, but life rarely changes overnight. Sometimes the first warning signs are so small that they almost seem meaningless. Mine began with tiny moments that I brushed aside without giving them much thought. One coworker who used to smile every morning suddenly became distant. Another stopped inviting me to lunch. A woman from accounting who had always been friendly barely acknowledged me in the hallway. I assumed everyone was simply busy. Work could be stressful. People had personal problems. Not every awkward interaction meant something was wrong. That explanation satisfied me for a while. Then another strange thing happened. I found out that a team from work had gone out for dinner together after finishing a large project. Nearly everyone had been invited, except me. No one mentioned it beforehand. No one explained why I wasn't included. When I accidentally saw photos online the next day, I felt a quiet sting of disappointment. I tried convincing myself it wasn't intentional. Maybe they had assumed I was busy. Maybe the restaurant had limited space. Maybe it was organized at the last minute. I kept inventing reasonable explanations because I didn't want to believe anything else. Emily acted surprised when I mentioned it. She said she had no idea a dinner had even been planned. At the time, I believed her without hesitation. I had absolutely no reason not to. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. I had no idea that those small moments were only the beginning of something much bigger. And I certainly never imagined that the one person I trusted most already knew exactly why my world was slowly beginning to change. The weeks that followed felt strangely different, although I couldn't explain why. Nothing dramatic happened. No one openly argued with me. No one accused me of doing anything wrong. Instead, it was as if an invisible wall had quietly appeared between me and everyone around me. I noticed conversations ending the moment I walked into the office kitchen. Coworkers who used to wave at me now only offered quick smiles before returning to whatever they were doing. Sometimes I caught people looking at me for a second longer than usual before quickly looking away. Every time it happened, I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, everyone has insecure moments. Maybe I was simply overthinking. Emily certainly thought so. Whenever I mentioned feeling disconnected from the team, she reassured me that work environments naturally changed over time. She reminded me that people became busy with deadlines, family responsibilities, and personal problems. Her explanations sounded perfectly reasonable. So I accepted them. I trusted her judgment more than my own. One afternoon, my manager asked me to stop by his office. I wasn't worried. In fact, I assumed he wanted to discuss a project I had recently completed. Instead, he asked a question that completely caught me off guard. He wondered whether everything was all right at home. For a moment, I didn't even know how to answer. I told him everything was fine. He looked relieved but also slightly confused. He explained that someone had mentioned I had been struggling emotionally and that I often arrived at work exhausted because of personal problems. I stared at him in disbelief. None of that was true. I had never told anyone anything like that. I laughed awkwardly and assured him there must have been some misunderstanding. He accepted my explanation and changed the subject, but as I walked back to my desk, my mind refused to let the conversation go. Who had said that? And why? I tried to forget about it. Still, similar situations kept happening. One coworker apologized for not inviting me to join a client meeting because she assumed I was already overwhelmed with work. The strange part was that I had never said I was overwhelmed. Someone else mentioned hearing that I planned to leave the company within a few months. Again, I had never said anything remotely close to that. The rumors weren't outrageous. They were believable, small enough that no one questioned them, yet each one quietly changed how people treated me. I started wondering whether I had accidentally given someone the wrong impression without realizing it. Maybe I had complained too much one day. Maybe I had spoken carelessly. The uncertainty was exhausting. Outside of work, things slowly became strange as well. People I had recently met through Emily stopped contacting me. Messages went unanswered, plans were cancelled. One woman I thought I had connected with suddenly became distant without offering any explanation. I couldn't understand what I had done wrong. Emily always sympathized. She told me people could be unreliable. She insisted I shouldn't take it personally. Once again, her advice comforted me. She always knew exactly how to calm me down. Months continued to pass. Then another opportunity appeared at work. A leadership position opened within my department. Several coworkers encouraged me to apply. Even my manager hinted that he believed I had a strong chance. I spent an entire weekend preparing my application. Emily helped me organize my ideas. She reviewed everything carefully and encouraged me to believe in myself. When I submitted the application, I felt proud. For the first time since moving, I truly believed my career was heading in the right direction. The interview went better than I expected. I answered every question confidently. I left the room smiling. A few days later, however, I learned I hadn't been selected. That disappointment alone wouldn't have bothered me. Someone else could simply have been more qualified. But then I overheard something that made my stomach tighten. Two coworkers were quietly discussing the hiring decision. One of them mentioned that management had apparently questioned whether I could be trusted with confidential information because I tended to share private details too freely. I nearly stopped breathing. That accusation made absolutely no sense. Protecting confidential information had always been one of my strengths. I had never violated anyone's trust. I wanted to interrupt the conversation. I wanted to ask where they had heard something so ridiculous. Instead, I froze. For the rest of the day, those words echoed inside my head. That evening, I called my older sister. She had always been the person who knew me best. I told her everything that had been happening over the past several months. She listened quietly. When I finished, she asked one simple question. Who knows all the personal information you've been sharing? I answered almost immediately. Emily. My sister became silent for a few seconds. Then she carefully suggested something I rejected the moment I heard it. She wondered whether Emily might be repeating some of those conversations to other people. I defended Emily without hesitation. I told my sister she didn't know her. Emily had always supported me. She had welcomed me into the city when I had no one. She had helped me through every difficult moment. There was simply no way she would betray me. My sister didn't argue, she only said that sometimes trust makes us overlook possibilities we don't want to face. I ended the call feeling frustrated, not with Emily, with my sister. I thought she was being unfair. The following week, Emily and I met for coffee after work. Everything felt completely normal. She laughed at my stories. She asked how I was feeling after missing the promotion. I admitted that I was disappointed but determined to keep working hard. She encouraged me, just as she always had. Looking back now, I realize how carefully she listened whenever I spoke. Not just to comfort me. To collect information. At the time, I saw kindness. Now I see curiosity. A few days later, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I walked into the office earlier than usual because I wanted to finish a presentation before everyone else arrived. As I entered the break room, two coworkers immediately stopped talking. The silence felt unnatural. One of them looked embarrassed. Finally, she asked me a question that made my heart race. Is everything okay between you and Emily? The words caught me completely off guard. I smiled awkwardly and said that of course everything was fine. She looked surprised, almost confused. Then she quietly apologized and left without explaining anything. The other coworker followed her. I stood alone in the empty room, staring at my untouched cup of coffee. For the first time since moving to the city, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Not certainty, not anger, just the smallest spark of doubt. What if my sister had been right? What if the person I trusted more than anyone else wasn't the person I believed she was? I hated myself for even thinking it, but once that question entered my mind, I could no longer make it disappear. That single question stayed with me for days. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, but something inside me had changed. For the first time, I wasn't looking at Emily through the eyes of someone who trusted her completely. I was looking at her with quiet curiosity. I didn't want to believe my sister could be right. At the same time, I couldn't ignore everything that had happened. Over the past several months, the rumors, the strange distance from my coworkers, the missed promotion, the invitations that suddenly stopped, none of it made sense, unless it was connected. Instead of confronting Emily, I decided to do something I had never imagined I would have to do. I stopped sharing personal information. Whenever she asked about my weekend, I kept my answers short. When she asked whether I had exciting plans, I simply smiled and said I was taking it easy. If something good happened at work, I didn't mention it. If I felt stressed, I kept it to myself. At first, Emily didn't seem to notice. Then, she slowly became more curious. She asked more questions than usual. She wanted details. She wanted names. She wanted to know who I had been talking to during lunch breaks and whether my manager had spoken with me recently. For months, I would have answered every question without hesitation. Now I simply smiled and changed the subject. A strange pattern quickly appeared. The fewer details I gave Emily, the fewer strange rumors spread around the office. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make my heart sink. I decided to test my growing suspicion. One afternoon, I casually mentioned something that wasn't true. I told Emily I was thinking about accepting a job offer from another company. I made the story believable but harmless. I even added a few small details to make it sound convincing. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. I almost felt guilty afterward. 3 days later, one of my coworkers approached me and quietly asked whether it was true that I was planning to resign. I felt every muscle in my body freeze. I had told only one person, Emily. There was no longer any room for doubt. Still, I wanted certainty before making such a serious accusation. Over the next 2 weeks, I repeated the experiment. Each time, I shared a different harmless piece of false information. Each time, that exact information somehow found its way to someone else. One rumor claimed I was considering moving to another department. Another suggested I was struggling financially. One even implied I regretted accepting my current position. Every single story reached people I had never spoken to. The only connection between all of them was Emily. The realization hurt more than I expected. I wasn't angry at first. I was heartbroken. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? What had I ever done to deserve this? The answer came from somewhere I least expected. One Friday afternoon, I stayed late to finish a project. Most employees had already gone home. As I walked past a conference room, I noticed the door wasn't completely closed. Inside, several coworkers were cleaning up after a meeting. They didn't know I was nearby. One of them mentioned how surprised she had been after learning the truth about me. Another replied that she had always believed Emily because Emily seemed so sincere. My heart started racing. I stayed Completely still, they continued talking, without realizing I was listening. They explained that Emily often presented herself as someone who was worried about me. She never openly criticized me. Instead, she spoke with concern. She would quietly tell people she hoped I was doing okay. She hinted that I struggled with stress. She suggested I had trouble handling responsibility. She implied I sometimes exaggerated stories to gain sympathy. None of the rumors sounded cruel on their own. That was what made them so effective. Each one seemed believable. Each one made people trust me just a little less. Over time, those small doubts became my reputation. One coworker admitted she had started avoiding me because she believed I shared private conversations with everyone. Another confessed she thought I looked down on other employees because of something Emily had supposedly heard from me. The room fell silent for a moment. Then someone quietly said something I will never forget. She said that after spending more time with me directly, she realized none of those stories matched the person she had come to know. That sentence changed everything. For the first time in months, I realized I wasn't imagining any of it. It had been happening all along. The difference was that people were finally beginning to notice. I walked away before anyone saw me. I sat alone in my car for nearly an hour. I cried harder than I had cried in years, not because I had lost a friend, because I realized I had never actually had one. Over the following weeks, the truth spread naturally. Several coworkers began comparing experiences. They discovered Emily had told each of them slightly different versions of the same stories. Individually, those conversations seemed harmless. Together, they revealed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Management eventually became aware of what had been happening. They spoke privately with multiple employees. More people shared similar experiences. Some admitted Emily had also spread rumors about them in the past. I wasn't her first target. I simply hadn't known it. Emily eventually left the company. I never asked whether she resigned or was encouraged to leave. By that point, it no longer mattered. The damage she caused couldn't be erased overnight. Rebuilding trust took time. Some coworkers apologized to me. Others admitted they wished they had questioned the rumors sooner. I appreciated every apology, but I also understood how easily people believe information when it comes from someone they trust. The experience changed me forever. For a long time, I struggled to trust anyone. Whenever someone was overly friendly, I found myself wondering about their intentions. Whenever people complimented me, part of me questioned whether they truly meant it. Healing wasn't quick. It happened slowly, one honest conversation at a time, one genuine friendship at a time. Eventually, I realized something important. Emily hadn't destroyed my life. She had damaged my confidence. She had delayed my career. She had stolen months of happiness, but she hadn't taken away my ability to start again. A year later, I accepted a leadership position at another company. This time I built relationships differently. I stopped confusing openness with trust. I learned that trust isn't created by sharing every secret. It's created by watching how someone treats people when they have nothing to gain. Today my circle of friends is much smaller than it used to be, but every person in it has earned their place through honesty, consistency, and kindness. Sometimes, people ask me whether I regret moving to that city. My answer always surprises them. I don't. The hardest chapter of my life taught me one of the most valuable lessons I have ever learned. Not every person who calls themselves your friend wants to see you succeed. Some people stand beside you only so they can quietly pull you backward while pretending to support you. The most dangerous betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or obvious lies. Sometimes it arrives with a warm smile, thoughtful advice, and years of carefully earned trust. If my story helps even one person pay closer attention to the people they trust most, then everything I went through will have had a purpose. because real friendship should make your world feel bigger, never smaller.